Have you ever felt afraid of something that, deep down, you knew wasn't truly dangerous? Your heart races, your hands sweat, and suddenly, taking the next step feels impossible. It could be speaking in public, making a big decision, or even something as simple as stepping into an elevator. But what if I told you that fear is, more often than not, just an illusion created by your own brain? Fear is one of humanity's oldest instincts. It kept us alive for thousands of years by alerting us to real dangers, such as predators or environmental threats. But in today's world, our brains still react the same way to situations that aren't actually dangerous. This means that, many times, what we experience as fear is simply a mental processing error. In this video, you'll understand how fear works in your brain, why it often deceives you, and, most importantly, how to reprogram your mind to build courage. If you've ever felt that fear is holding you back, stay with me until the end, because today, you'll learn that it's possible to outsmart this feeling and take control of your life. Fear is a biological response designed to protect us. Since primitive times, our survival depended on the ability to detect threats and react quickly. Imagine an ancient hunter-gatherer in the jungle. If he heard a strange noise, his brain would instantly activate a state of alertness, preparing his body to fight or flee. This mechanism still exists within us today. The difference? We're no longer running from saber-toothed tigers but from meetings, tough decisions, and emotional challenges. The part of the brain responsible for this reaction is a small structure called the amygdala, which plays a key role in processing fear. When we perceive something as a threat, the amygdala takes action even before we are consciously aware of the situation. It releases hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, which increase heart rate, heighten muscle tension, and prepare us to respond. This explains why, when faced with something scary, we feel that sinking sensation in our stomach or experience trembling hands. However, fear doesn't act alone. Another part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, can regulate this response. It serves as a mediator, analyzing whether a threat is real or just a product of our imagination. The problem is that when fear becomes intense, the amygdala takes over and completely overrides rational thinking. That's why, even knowing that public speaking won't physically harm us, we still feel terrified before stepping on stage. Moreover, the brain has a mechanism called fear conditioning. If we've experienced negative situations in the past, our mind automatically associates certain circumstances with danger. For instance, someone who was rejected in a job interview may develop anxiety every time they need to speak with a recruiter, even if there's no real reason to be afraid. But here's the good news: if the brain can learn fear, it can also unlearn it. And that's exactly what we're going to explore in the next chapter. We'll understand why fear isn't always right and how it often tricks us into believing we're in much greater danger than we actually are. If fear were always an accurate reflection of reality, no one would make poor decisions because of it. But the problem is that our brain doesn't always distinguish between real threats and imagined dangers. This means that many of the situations we avoid aren't actually dangerous, they're just illusions created by our minds. Our brain has a natural tendency to overestimate threats. This happens because, from an evolutionary standpoint, it was better to flee from a false alarm than to ignore a real danger. The result? Today, we have exaggerated reactions to harmless situations. Have you ever noticed how, before a presentation, your mind starts creating catastrophic scenarios? You imagine yourself freezing up, people laughing at you, or something going terribly wrong. But once it's over, you realize none of that actually happened. This is one of the many ways fear deceives us. Another distortion comes from fear conditioning. If you've had a negative experience in the past, your brain records that event as a danger and automatically reacts to anything similar. For example, if someone had a panic attack in a closed space, they might start feeling afraid every time they enter an elevator, even without a logical reason. The brain simply switches to automatic mode and triggers the same warning signals. And there's more: fear can snowball. A small fear can turn into a massive mental block if it's reinforced repeatedly. The more we avoid something out of fear, the more our brain interprets it as genuinely dangerous. This is how phobias and paralyzing anxieties develop. A classic example is the fear of rejection. Many people feel an intense dread of being rejected, whether in relationships, at work, or even in simple social interactions. But in reality, most rejections aren't as devastating as we imagine. Our brain exaggerates the consequences, making it seem like a single no could be the end of the world. However, when we face rejection head-on, we realize that fear didn't match reality. If fear can deceive us so easily, how can we reverse this process? The answer lies in techniques that train the brain to respond differently. In the next chapter, we'll explore powerful strategies to outsmart fear and build courage, reprogramming your mind to take action even in the face of uncertainty. Now that we understand how fear can distort reality, the big question is, how can we trick our brain and turn fear into courage? The good news is that there are proven strategies to reprogram our minds and reduce the impact of fear. These techniques are used by psychologists, high-performance athletes, and even special forces to stay in control under pressure. The first strategy is gradual exposure. Since fear is fueled by avoidance, the only way to overcome it is to face it step by step. This means breaking the challenge into smaller parts and tackling each one progressively. If you're afraid of public speaking, for example, start by practicing at home, then in front of small groups of friends, and finally, move on to larger audiences. This method teaches the brain that the situation isn't as threatening as it seems, reducing the automatic fear response. Another powerful technique is cognitive reframing. Instead of trying to eliminate fear, we can change how we interpret it. Athletes and public speakers use this strategy all the time. When they feel their heart racing before a competition or presentation, instead of thinking, "I'm nervous," they train their brain to think, "I'm excited." The adrenaline released is the same in both cases, the only difference is how the mind perceives the situation. Additionally, we can use physiological control to reduce the impact of fear. The body and mind are directly connected. When we're anxious, our breathing becomes fast and shallow, sending signals to the brain that something is wrong. But when we consciously slow our breathing, we activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which lowers the stress response. Simple techniques, like inhaling deeply for 4 seconds, holding for 4, and exhaling slowly for 6, can trick the brain and calm the fear response. The fourth technique is positive visualization. Our brain doesn't distinguish between a real experience and an intensely imagined one. This means we can train our mind to face fear before we even take action. Elite athletes do this all the time. Before a major event, they close their eyes and visualize every movement, feeling the emotion of victory before they even compete. This mental rehearsal helps the brain prepare and respond with greater confidence when the moment arrives. These strategies don't eliminate fear, but they teach the brain to handle it differently. The key isn't to wait for fear to disappear but to take action despite it. Great leaders, athletes, and entrepreneurs aren't fearless, they've simply learned how to manage fear and move forward even when uncertainty arises. But there's a common mistake many people make when trying to overcome fear, and it might be holding you back. In the next chapter, we'll talk about the biggest mistake when facing fear and how to avoid it so you don't fall into this mental trap. If there's one trap people fall into when trying to overcome fear, it's the belief that they must eliminate it completely before taking action. This is the most common mistake, and paradoxically, it's what keeps fear strong. The truth is simple: if you're waiting to feel fearless before taking action, you'll be waiting forever. Fear never completely disappears. It can be reduced, controlled, and even turned into motivation, but it cannot be erased from our biology. The problem is that many people believe they need to feel 100% confident before facing a difficult situation. The result? They postpone challenges, avoid risks, and remain stuck in their comfort zone. But fear doesn't fade with time, in fact, it grows when left unchallenged. This is the paradox of fear: the more you avoid it, the stronger it becomes. What you avoid today becomes even scarier tomorrow. Have you ever noticed how small insecurities can turn into major phobias when reinforced by avoidance? If you're afraid of driving and never push through it, even holding the steering wheel can become overwhelming over time. The key to breaking this cycle isn't waiting for fear to disappear, it's acting despite it. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward even while feeling uncertain. Great leaders, athletes, and entrepreneurs weren't born fearless, they just learned not to let fear control their decisions. To illustrate this, think of someone who overcame a major fear and transformed their life. A business owner who risked everything to start a company, an athlete who fought through an injury to return to the top, or an ordinary person who faced their social anxiety and built meaningful relationships. What do they all have in common? None of them waited for fear to disappear. They simply decided to take action, and over time, fear lost its power. In the next chapter, we'll connect all these concepts and turn this knowledge into action. Get ready for a practical challenge that will help you face your fears in a real and immediate way. Fear will always be there, but now you know it doesn't have to control you. The secret isn't to eliminate it, but to learn how to act despite it. And as we've seen, there are techniques that can help: gradual exposure, cognitive reframing, physiological control, and positive visualization. All of these train your brain to transform fear into courage. Now, here's a challenge: what fear has been holding you back lately? It could be public speaking, making an important decision, or even changing something in your life. Choose one specific fear and take the first step toward facing it this week. It doesn't have to be anything huge, just a small step that signals to your brain that you are in control. Remember, fear doesn't disappear before action, it fades with action. Each time you face a fear, it loses some of its power over you. That's the true path to courage. Now I want to hear from you. What fear are you going to challenge this week? Write it in the comments and share your journey with others. And if this video helped you, share it with someone who also needs to learn how to outsmart fear and build courage. See you in the next video.